Hi, Hunter Hastings here. The great goal of the Value Creators podcast and our associated programs is to point to a new direction for strategy for business and for organization for business. We found a great ally in Mike Jones. Mike operates a consulting company and a podcast called Strategy Meets Reality. And he's an organizational psychologist, he's a systems thinker, but he's very interested in fixing the problems of business strategy. In a world that is complex, unpredictable, and constantly shifting, most strategies rely on outdated assumptions of control, uncertainty, and linear plans. That's certainly what we talk about all the time. I had the chance to be a guest on Mike's podcast and point to some of the pathways that entrepreneurial economics offers to get to the new world of strategy and business implementation that Mike's aiming for. Let's listen.
This is the Value Creators Podcast, your source for a new kind of business education, escaping from business administration mode and entering dynamic entrepreneurship mode. We're guided by entrepreneurial economics, which is the source of all growth and positive change for businesses of all sizes in all markets. We talk to experienced experts in value creation so that there's business learning for you in every episode.
Welcome back to the Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Today, I'm glad to be joined by Hunter Hastings. It's great to finally get you on the podcast, Hunter. How have you been?
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Just for our listeners, do you mind giving a bit of a background about yourself and a bit of context about what you've been up to lately?
Well, today I'm in the field of business education, and I'll be happy to talk about why and what we're trying to do and the revolution that we're trying to make. I was born in your country, in Hartlepool in the UK.
I can see why you got out.
Got my education there, joined a multinational company called Procter & Gamble there.
Yes, yeah.
That led to a corporate career in multiple countries. I eventually found my way to Silicon Valley. I was a CEO there of a company actually that Procter & Gamble was funding as part of their corporate venture back then in 2000. Started another couple of companies, got into venture capital, and now today I'm in business education.
Oh, nice. Sounds great. You're definitely an interesting background, especially working in Silicon Valley back in the, that was in the glory days of growth.
I got there just before the dot-com crash, as they call it here. But you're right, there was a mindset that if you put enough computers, MBAs, and money into a room, you could achieve anything. And that was the spirit of the times.
That's awesome. I'd love to, you said you're creating a revolution. What do you mean by that? What revolution are you trying to make?
Well, I think there's a big discontinuity in thinking about business today. And business education hasn't caught up. In fact, it's causing a lot of damage. So let me try and explain that. We have this old concept of how to manage, how to run corporations. Essentially, it's a hierarchy with a CXO, C-suite at the top, layers of management, lots of process and rules and methods. It's divided into parts, different functions. It's a mechanistic point of view. It's an engine. You can fine-tune it to make it better. And that developed really in the 19th century with the great entrepreneurs back then, like Standard Oil under Rockefeller and all the standard examples. But the companies grew so big that the entrepreneurs couldn't control them. And so they started to put in professional management as a means of control. And that was very valuable at the time. It was an innovation, but it's become very restrictive now. And today, we think of companies in a different mental model, which is a living system, or systems thinking, as they call it, where the function is not control, it's adaptation. So in systems thinking, you look at systems, they adapt themselves to changes. They run lots of experiments to see what changes they can provoke, and then they constantly change and proceed on that basis. It's not management, it's system constraining. How do I direct this system, which is to a great extent self-organizing and self-managing? How do I point it in the right direction? And we think that's what's going on in Silicon Valley and the Magnificent Seven and a lot of other companies. We might talk about some things that are going on in China. We're training people in business education to do something called business administration, right? You get an
Yeah, yeah.
MBA.
That's the MBA.
Masters of Business Administration. And administration is the worst way to run a business because in this new model, it's got to be fluid and adaptive and, as we say, self-organizing. So we're trying to create a new form of business education that can create that entrepreneurial mindset, thinking about systems as opposed to thinking about managing.
Yeah. One thing I always thought about with the business education or leadership education that we have at the moment is that it's very loads of models to tell you what to do. And, they're quite simplistic to work out. As long as you aim for the top, normally the right corner, you're winning.
Right.
And they're very static. I think and linear. They don't really get to grips with, like you said, a living system that's adapting, the self-organizing, and some of the old truisms aren't really that true anymore. And it feels like there's a big disconnect, a drag happening where you've got thinkers and like yourselves working with organizations, and organizations are cottoning on to the fact that these things aren't really working as they used to, but the education field is still anchoring it back. And we're still shoving all our leaders and that through this education system that's telling them the stuff that we know not to be true anymore, but we don't have anything else to show them.
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Mike. A couple of words to pick up on there. One is linearity. So the concept of management is exactly as you say. It's a linear idea. If I do X, Y will happen. It's a cause and effect. Whereas what we're learning in the science of systems now, and this is science, there's been a lot of scientific exploration work done in these kinds of areas, is that they're nonlinear, that they're about interaction of different components, especially people, that produce what they call emergence. Something emerges which wasn't predicted in terms of cause and effect or nonlinearity. So how do you manage that? Well, you don't. You try and shape it, observe it, maybe point it in a certain direction. And so that's, as you say, the trying to teach leadership. And that's another term that I think we have to question, because leadership requires followership, and that's not the way that we want to be in business today. So people are examining different forms of organization. So you've heard all the discussion about small autonomous teams, where you get a bunch of smart people, each with different specialists. You put them on a team, and you don't tell them what to do. You give them the exploratory freedom to go and identify a new outcome, and then you figure out how to fit it into the system. So I think linearity and leadership are two of the words that we're trying to find new alternatives to.
Yeah. And even with this leadership point, it's coming, and I reckon it's the proliferation of coaches and stuff. It's all about mindset. And people are going on about, just we have the mindset to do it. And, if we can believe it, we can do it. But they forget the fundamental element is what we're talking about, that structure. And we're constraining people too much. We're not allowing people the freedom of action because we're constraining them too much, which means they don't have that freedom to make decisions or be exploratory or sense make.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so the mental model, the approach to that is not to try and give somebody a mindset or shape their mindset. It's to unleash, to find out the barriers. You called it freedom. So the other side of that is barriers and blockages. Take those away. I like the word unleashing a lot. Let's unleash that talent.
Yeah.
It'll be collaborative. They'll work together because that's a very human trait. It'll be motivated because they're trying to be successful and create something new. But don't try and direct their mindset. Try and give them more degrees of freedom is the term that we try to do. And then see what happens. That's the emergence part. So that's really an anathema, Mike, to the whole system of management and business education and everything we're talking about. It's a really hard shift to make.
Yeah, it is. There's so much years of doctrine that is gone into this way of thinking that it's hard then when, I find that I write a lot about this stuff and you get challenged by it because they're like, well, it's just chaos. And we're not advocating chaos. We're like, I like your term, unleashing. We're just removing unnecessary barriers so that they're spending more time with the capacity to think about outcomes and explore outcomes and the external environment rather than trying to impedes internal inertia, which
Right.
tends to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It gets locked in. So one of the questions that is not clear yet is whether an established corporation can change, or is all of this new form of organization and self-organization, is it only going to happen in new companies? I'll get a slight bit academic on you for a second, Mike. There's a concept, an old concept of the scientific revolution by Thomas Kuhn. And his idea is that this can't change gradually. You've got people locked into the old conventional wisdom, and that's where the word paradigm comes from in his writing, the old paradigm. And the people in that paradigm can't see the new paradigm. They can't understand it. They don't get the language. They think it's crazy. As you say, they see chaos. And so only new thinkers can develop the new paradigm. People don't move. It's a revolution, a leap. So, that's a challenge. Can standard corporation or business education, can it adopt the new paradigm, or does it have to be a revolution? I lean to the revolution side.
Well, talking about revolution, you mentioned China earlier. What does China have to do with this?
Well, there's a couple of things that we've seen. There's a famous article in Harvard Business Review, which gets read over here, is called "Are the Chinese Reinventing Management?" And
right, I haven't actually seen that. But...
Well, there's a couple of examples in there. One is a company called Handu, a pretty big company generating hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars by now. It sells fast fashion, and it's not managed in the way that we think about it. There's a front end, which is 1,000 or maybe 10,000, I don't know the number, but thousands of websites that are approaching consumers directly, offering different fashion and designs and so on like that. There's an entrepreneur, a designer, and a webmaster there, a technical individual, and they're given a small amount of resources and then turned loose. Do what you like to try and build revenue and sell units and so on like that. That's connected to a middle layer, which is entirely software. It's the payment systems and the inventory management systems and the communication systems and so on like that. And then the back end is the physical assets, the warehouses and the servers and that kind of thing, the databases. And there's a little layer of senior executives on the top. But you turn these thousands of teams, these small teams, loose. If they do well, they generate more revenue, the system will give them more resources. If they don't do well, you close them down or you fold them into another one. It's self-managing. It's self-organizing. The Harvard Business Review tried to call it digitally enhanced autonomy or something like that, which is...
Oh, right.
It's an exploration. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah. But that's...
And then...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to give you one more example, if I may. Earlier this year, there was a big fuss when DeepSeek, the new AI model, came out of China, which surprised everybody. But if you dug in underneath that and you read about how they organized, there was an entrepreneur, a founder. He'd made money somewhere else in running hedge funds. But what he did was recruit smart people, and especially young people, because he said experience brings baggage, and we didn't need any of that. We just wanted new young minds. And just said, do research. There was... to get to better AI, but a very non-specific goal, lots of experiments, tons of computing power that they had free access to, and eventually DeepSeek came out of that. There was no strategy, there was no purpose, there was no process. It was just undirected research. So those are two examples.
Yeah, but just picking on your point where you said there was no strategy, there was no purpose and stuff like that. But I think there probably was. It's just not the orthodoxy that we're used to in a sense of organizations. Organizations seem to now have this bit on their website where they're going, our strategy, and you look at it and it goes, our purpose is to, I don't know, save the planet, or, and I think it gets voided into this ism of stuff that we must have, rather than that was very clear. And a bit like your first example, I love the simplicity of what he says. What they said was that do what you need to do to make revenue. And you think about organizations are going to get a bit wild out here at the moment, but like ISIS and stuff like that. They were self-organizers, and they grew rapidly in their area because the simplicity around do what you need to do. Obviously, you can argue the ethical dilemmas that can bring, but it's simply that it gave them the space to self-organize. And that's what Stafford Beer was talking about in systems, to make things self-creating, self-organizing, so that the teams that are adding the value have maximum freedom of action to adapt to the needs, rather than to worry more about filling in spreadsheets and metrics and stuff and reporting
Yeah.
up.
And the binding force, what gives it the morality or the ethics, is value creation. So one of the things that we've realized coming from the old model, which was about profit maximization, we've shifted to value creation. Value is for customers, but also for colleagues, people that you're working with. And value is in the eye of the beholder. So am I creating value? Let them decide. You monetize it through payments, right? Value has a price in the marketplace that generates revenue. But the point is about creating value. The customer decides. If they like it, you do more of it. If they don't, you don't. And so that's the moral drive that binds this together. So that's the other big difference, is value creation versus profit maximization.
Yeah, and we know that's when, I said the example of simplicity about the intent that those were given around making the revenue, but it's like you said, it's more about the value exchange. Are they increasing that value exchange, then people are willing? And you see where it goes wrong when they don't have that value idea and maximizing value. Over here we have water companies, and fortunately our water company is not nationalized, it's privatized, and they're very much on revenue. So they've been trying to make massive amounts of revenue, but if you speak to people that they should be serving, people don't get the value, because we have to go through water bans. So we can't, hose pipe bans we call them, so we can't use water. They haven't built any infrastructure for the last probably over decade. We lose something ridiculous like 3 billion liters of water a year through leaks. So you're thinking they're all about the profit maximization, which then leads to the eroding of trust. Instead, if they thought about value maximization, they would make sure that the people they're serving are really happy with the results they're getting. They're getting served. They feel like they can get what they need. Yeah. So I think it's definitely a better way of looking at how a business maintains viability.
Yeah, and it would change behavior. One of the ways I like to think about that is, you talk about your water company, they're focusing on the P&L, the revenue side of things, and they're letting the balance sheet, the asset side of things, the infrastructure decline. If you're in the value creation business, you don't do that, because you understand that it's the assets that generate the value experience for the customer. If I let my assets decline, I'm going to create less value, and so I don't want to do that. That's a negative approach. So there's one of the things that I like is, as a development, is that valuation process are looking longer and longer term now. So the stock market worries about quarterly earnings, but when we think about value creation, it's sometimes expressed as EVA, economic value added, but there's many forms of it. But it looks at not only today, but also the future. And am I improving that asset base, the infrastructure, or am I letting it decline? And there's a whole field of looking at. So you look at a company like Amazon that we love over here. I think it's global, so you like it over there too.
Yeah.
They're constantly investing in their asset base, and it went from the delivery system to the cloud computing, and now they're looking at AI models. Tons of investment, always improving that asset base. So this thinking about value creation actually creates better economic behavior by the corporations, or the ones who own the assets.
Yeah. It reminds me of time I worked for Amazon at one point as a client, as a consultant. Yeah, and I remember being at their headquarters in London, and suddenly all these alarms went off, and then an announcement came over, because they just managed at the first time. And I don't know if it's worldwide or not, but it's probably just UK, because I was in the UK part. They managed to deliver a parcel from the point someone pressed pay to their door within an hour.
Wow.
And they put it over the whole tannoy, the whole business, to celebrate this thing, because that comes back to your point about they're investing in their infrastructure, their ability, their capability to add more value. Because before Amazon came, you wouldn't dream of being able to get one in that day, let alone within an hour.
Yeah, so Andy Jassy, who's the CEO now of Amazon, talked about that. He talked about running his company like a giant startup. You're going to think like a startup, which includes getting rid of all that bureaucracy and management layer that we've talked about. I like to call that venture mode. Every company's got to run in venture mode, which doesn't tolerate any waste, and everything's got to be directed at the customer. He said they've got to love innovation. So that's your alarm company going, hey, we've achieved an innovation. We have a metric for it. And they've got to love to build things, build systems, and create a system that can achieve that. So that venture mode is our contrast to administration mode. It's that different way of thinking. And that's the biggest corporation, right? A giant corporation. But they can do it.
I know, yeah. And but you see even smaller organizations where it's like, I want to be inventive and do something, but I can't. Or, it's you see a lot of organizations get themselves in this position where it's easier not to do something than it is easier to do something. So that just reinforces them to just do nothing and just accept the status quo.
Yeah, and so that's a really interesting challenge. Just to continue about Jassy, so that's a decision. People decide whether they can do things or not. There's nothing constraining them. It's just a decision. And his way of overcoming that is speed. So if you make speed your style, then people aren't going to say, hey, there's something holding me back, or I can't do this. They're going to say, I have to move faster. Even if you're not going to be 100% right all the time, speed becomes the solution to that constraint of administration or tradition, or I can't do this. And so that's an interesting observation. Speed was not part of the old management technique, and speed is part of the new self-organizing technique. He said that they built a delivery system the size of UPS in 2.5 years.
Wow.
And it took decades for the original network to be built that way.
Well, look at like DeepSeek. That was built relatively quickly compared to,
I think 18 months or something like that.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. That have that much power. But speed is crucial. Time is crucial. Often I look at people's strategies. I have to look at people's strategies and what they're doing. Rarely do I see time in there. You say you want to make these choices and make these decisions, but by when and for what reason? And we talk about the viability principle, that an organization must be able to adapt as quick as the environment or its competitors, or quicker. Otherwise, it will cease to be viable. So I think that speed is really important to encourage that adaptation. That let's not malaise and let's do something.
Yeah. And in startups, Mike, as you know, the thought about speed is in the J curve. So if you look at the investment that when you invest in a startup company, you're underwater, right? You put money in before there's any revenue coming. You got to increase that J curve as fast as you can to minimize those investment losses until you get into the black, and then drive it from there. So that if you think of every project that a corporation is doing as a startup venture, then you're in the J curve, and then you got to accelerate that as fast as you can, as opposed to preservation or not taking risks and so on. So speed is really strategic element.
Yes, yeah. I like it. And you see in this new way of thinking about organizations and management, when you talk about, we break these to small autonomous teams, or autonomous teams, not necessarily small, but relative to size, so they can maintain adaptability. That also helps with the organization to adapt. As long as you've got good coordination amongst them, that means that if you're trying to adapt, there's only parts that are adapting at any one time, rather than what you see traditionally, because you're so centralized. Alignment became the new word for centralizing, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah. So they didn't want to call it centralized anymore, so they call it alignment, and think that was a good thing. That any change meant that you had to try and create change over this vast thing that became slow and arduous, and probably accounts for why a lot of transformations don't really achieve their full objective that they set out to do.
Yeah, you got to get approval from the layer above, right?
Yeah.
There's an interesting case that is used a lot over here of a company called Morningstar, which is in a very conventional business. They make tomato paste out of the tomatoes.
Oh, right.
And the number one in their business. It's over $1 billion company. And they had a principle of no management. They called it no coercion. The second principle is everybody keeps their commitments to their colleagues. So their mechanism for this autonomy, an operating system for autonomy, is they call it the colleague letter of understanding, which is everybody signs literally a letter of understanding, says, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my commitment. Here's what I expect from you. And you negotiate that. It's an agreement. And then off you go on your autonomous team or your collaboration. So this letter of understanding replaces all of the managerial processes. Hey, I commit to what I'm going to do. I'll let you know later how I did it, but I'm going to do it. And you're committing to me. It's a really interesting innovation in management systems.
Yeah, I like it. Well, that comes a lot to, again, come back to Stafford Beer when he first sort of thought about System 3, the management. It wasn't what we call traditional management. It was about that bargaining. So this is what I want you to do. I achieve the outcome, not how to do it. This is the outcome I want you to achieve. This is resources I've got, and it's a bargaining. So you go, well, if you want to do that, I need a bit more of that, or I could actually do a little bit more for you, but I need that. And it's a bargaining, a relationship. And then they went off and delivered it, rather than I don't know what it's sort of coming to now, where it's just fixed. I want you to do this, but you're not getting any more resources. There's no value. I think that come back to the point, is that value exchange. There's no value exchange. It's a case of, I just want you to do lots of this, and I'm not going to give you the decision rights, resources, or support to do it, but I still want it done. Do more or less.
We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course. For entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry, our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. Go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link.
Yes, so the part of the concept in the colleague letter of understanding and systems like that is between you and me, there's a value pie. We're creating this value pie through our exchange and collaboration. How can we make that bigger through each of our actions and what we learn and the new knowledge and so on like that? So everybody wins. It's an everybody wins concept of the bigger and bigger value pie.
Yes, yeah. And you see that that can work really effective in angel investing or investing into business. About that, I'm going to take this bit, but together we can grow this pie. We can, and there's a mutual, well, it should be, hopefully, if you've got a good investor, there's a mutual respect there to grow together and to build something together, and each get a win-win out of it, rather than to take a massive percentage of your business and I'm just going to take what I want back.
Yeah, and part of that is specialization. So letting people be really, really good at what they do and figure out the way to put them in a community where those specializations are complementary. They expand the value pie. So the investor's bringing capital. Hopefully that will attract talent. The talent is all specialized, but we put it together in the best possible way, and we create more value for the customer. It's the opposite of management. It's an assembly process, certainly, but it's not a directing process.
Yeah, and you brought on a real novel idea when you talked about DeepSeek, was that they got clever people in and let clever people do what they needed to do. And I think that's a novel thing with organizations. We get these clever people and then we don't let them use their intelligence. We constrain
Right.
it.
Well, you used another great word, Mike, which is intent. And I love that for how to give direction to these companies. So the intent is, it's not as grandiose as a vision, and it's not as precise as a mission. It's, boy, this is the direction I want to go in. So they had this idea of a Chinese AI that would compete with the great models in the world. That was an intent. It wasn't highly specific. And then, as you say, let people do what they need to do to get there. And maybe I'll define that intent better while I'm on the path.
Yeah. And I think that's that. You want enough clarity that can to give them direction to go, but you don't want it too constraining that it removes that ability to adapt and to. Otherwise, you're going to lose opportunities. If it's too fixed and you go, I want this, it's never going to meet reality.
Yeah, and the way I like to think about that is fitting into the system. So at some level, the system already exists. I've got to find, through intent, my rightful place in it where I can contribute. And that might move around. I might collaborate with different people to create that uniqueness. So I think the other element is finding that uniqueness. How can I contribute to the system by fitting into it, but it's all very positive in value creation.
Yeah, I like that. We often talk about the value exchange when we're doing strategies, and not only do we look at the relationship of the actors that are in the external environment, but we also look at the value exchange. What value exchange do you from your perception, do you currently get, and what do you think that they currently get from you? And when you look at that, you go, well, what do you think they need more of, or what do you think they want less of, to try and make sure that you get that value?
Yeah. Yeah, understanding that is really, really important, and it's dynamic. So the value exchange is important, but it's one part of the cycle. So after the value exchange, there's a value experience.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not in that experience. I'm the provider, but the customer has the experience. They're going to assess that afterwards, valuation, and then decide whether they're going to come back for more or whether they're going to go to a different place. So the value exchange is really important, but you got to monitor it through the subsequent experience and then try and enhance that. So it's dynamic more than static.
Yeah, it is going to be dynamic and change, because as the context changes, people's needs change, their expectations change. So maybe still getting the same value. Just thinking about your tomato puree paste company, probably back in the day, it was fine that they used a lot of plastics or stuff, and then it's still the same substance inside. It's just being packaged and delivered the way to maintain that value experience for the customer.
Yeah.
Meet their needs.
Yeah. That's a great example of adapting to the environment, right? The environment is consumer perceptions of what's safe or what's reasonable to use in packaging it. That's definitely changed. There's a really interesting process going on over here now about food and what is healthy food. So food's gone from fuel to healthy, and we're starting to question all of that. And the corporations have to change their ingredients and get the dyes out and things like that.
Yeah.
That's a great example. And I think that adaptiveness is also the opposite of the old style of management. So I produced a strategy which was trying to control what's going to happen for the next year or the next 5 years. And I had a plan, and it's got 12 columns for the 12 months. And you try to inject statics into something that is inherently dynamic. So I think we've overcome that as well.
Yeah. And that movement from RFK and, is Maha, the Make America Healthy Again thing was interesting. Along with USAID and stuff, they're both interesting because they've changed the regulations, they've changed the external environment which people are operating in. But a lot of people didn't see that coming. I've just had a podcast before, and there's several people I spoke to now that are in the third sector environment. They were so wedded to the fact that America was always going to fund them, and that was it. And then suddenly Trump's come in, taken away heavily restricted US aid, and they're like, oh, what do we do? But there's no sense of adaptation. They're not used to that adaptation. They haven't looked and thought, well, what could change? What's our fundamental risk? If that took away, what would happen? Where could we go? Where could we emerge to? It's just a static thing of, oh, it's gone now. What do we do?
Right. Right. So the concept we try and think through is uncertainty. That's the the term in economics, which is I don't know what's going to happen. So I've got to take that as reality. So always examine those assumptions and premises. What assumptions am I operating on? Like I'm always going to be fun. And create that possibility space. What are all the things that could happen? Try and narrow it down a little bit. So that's I'm going to play in this space, and it's got some narrower possibilities. I'd like to turn it into a probability space. I can be more confident. But you've got to understand and feel for and accept that uncertainty at all times. And something might change drastically, as you said. I've got to be ready. Got to be adaptive.
I love that thing you said then about what assumptions are we working on? Because I'd question a lot of leadership teams and organizations that do they really understand the assumptions that they're working on and how fragile some of those may be?
Yeah, and understanding that you are operating on assumptions. Everybody is.
Yeah.
And so putting those under the microscope, do I really understand what assumptions I'm making? And then are they valid? That you're right. That's a great contribution. That Elon Musk calls that first principles, right? First principles thinking.
Yeah.
His famous example is about the reusable rockets. So we had the assumption that airplanes are reusable, but rockets aren't. Well, why? Why is that an assumption? And that eventually got him to the reusable rocket, which has changed the economics and dynamics of space exploration incredibly.
Oh, yeah, hugely impactful. Even think about DeepSeek, the assumptions they were doing, that the assumptions that you needed this massive computing infrastructure, and well, you don't need it. They worked out you don't need it. So then that's made it more accessible for entrants to come now into the AI space, which is making a lot of pressure on what's his name, Sam. He's a ChatGPT guy for Sam something in it.
Yeah, the
Altman. That's
OpenAI, right?
Yeah. It's showing the fragility now of OpenAI really in the business model there. I did read something quite interesting about, we've had you mentioned earlier, the internet crash of Silicon Valley, but they're sort of starting to predict the startup crash, because you've got all these startups are putting money in, and they're not making any money. They're just getting invested with loads and loads and loads of money, but they're not returning anything.
Yeah. Well, they're in the J curve still, and you've got to figure out, to your point, what's the time element of the J curve, and will some of them or all of them get through the J curve and get into positive returns? But what they're trying to do is, like any startup, you've got the economic value add that you're going to make after you've completed the J curve, and discount that to the future, so to the present. So it's an estimate, and because of uncertainty, we have no idea whether that estimate is going to be right or not. So there's a lot of big bets going on, and we'll see what happens. I mean, if you estimate the potential value of those future growth of AI, you can certainly discount it back and justify today's expenditure. But you don't know whether the estimate is right. So big bet.
Yeah, I just really like that idea of really challenging the assumptions that we hold to be true, how true they are, and actually how much businesses, like we talked about, third sector, how their whole assumption around that America would continue to fund them, that they just sort of ignored everything else, rather than thinking about how could we de-risk this by finding other sources of investment or different ways that we can get funding. They just assume.
We got a couple of giant universities here in the US that have had to totally rethink their business model for that very reason. The funding is withdrawn.
I think a lot of our universities are really struggling. Definitely when the government here constrained foreign students to come in. They constrained some of the rules that made it harder for foreign students to come to some of the universities. But the universities were so reliant on it. It was the assumption that they could always get that in. And I think there's an assumption that people will always go get a degree. I think that started to disappear slowly.
Yes, that's another fundamental difference, Mike, in the new way of thinking about management and organization. So the assumption tends to be that the next period will be like this period, right? I'm going to do a straight
Yeah.
line projection.
Plus or minus 10%.
Yeah, that's exactly the assumption. The assumption in self-organization and complex systems is that that's not going to be the case. New stuff is going to happen that I can't predict. Therefore, how can I be prepared for that? How can I be an adaptive corporation? And so that's a big change in assumptions.
Yes. And then you sort of start thinking that way, then it makes sense why you'd want agility. It makes sense why you would need to make sure you've got you actually spend more time looking at the future and innovations and how we bring that into the organization, rather than the assumption is that it is always going to be quite stable. So as long as we're efficient and we've got lower cost per head count than anything else, then that's it. We'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's another big change, I think, Mike. And in economics, they introduced the idea of efficiency, which is always translated as reducing cost. So I can increase my margin. Whereas today, we don't think in efficiency, we think in effectiveness. Can I create value? I'll manage the costs later. The question is, can I be effective in creating value? So that again is a huge mind shift. Economics is my academic track, and I think efficiency is one of the worst ideas that economists have introduced to business. And
Yeah.
it's very damaging.
It is. Yeah, it is. And it's always about just reducing costs rather than, and it's normally blind. It's not looking at, where can we add value and how do we add that value? It's just straight away, we just need to cut costs, and it's just blind. They just go, oh, we'll just cut it from here, cut it from there. There's no actual understanding about what's that going to impact on how we merge value.
Right. And the other thing that happens there is people become costs, right? Their payroll costs or their customer service is a cost, and therefore I'll try and reduce that because it's a cost. And then the damage that I do can be many multiplications of just the accounting line of reducing dollars.
Yeah. Well, look at, we've got a company over called Octopus Energy. They're like the fastest growing energy company in the UK. And so what traditionally happens is that the first thing that goes is we outsource our customer service, or we automate a customer service. So anyone wants to phone up, they have to speak to AI, or they speak to a machine for ages until they eventually may get to someone, and that someone then can't help them. Where Octopus Energy, it's not novel, but it's a really useful idea that actually, why don't we actually have people? So that if someone needs to phone up, they can phone up straight away and they'll get hold of a person pretty quickly. But not only will they get hold of someone really quickly, because there's nothing more frustrating than waiting, is that person has all the autonomy to make decisions. So that one person can actually solve their problem, rather than then you need to speak to this person and then you spend all your time trying to get to the right person that can help you. And I think that's an idea about how do we add value rather than cutting costs.
Well, I was going to say exactly right. That's a great example of value adding. So what is the customer value? Well, obviously they value talking to people. They value getting a good decision. They don't value talking to a telephone tree, and they don't value yet talking to an AI quite so much, but they do value people and responsiveness and being nice to you and getting you to the right answer. So that's good value analysis, I think.
Yeah.
I hope they're doing well.
Yeah, doing really well. Normally, traditionally, and again, I think it's the assumption that the traditional energy companies had. They're still very much like back in the days where you had IBM and the Seven Dwarfs. They just locked in. There was no space for incumbents. But now the assumptions have changed, and you've got these incumbents coming in that are dominating. So their assumptions that they will always dominate is starting to fall apart. So that's quite good.
That's another thing that's changing a lot is this idea of industry structure, that you can point to the boundaries of an industry and then there'll be 3 dominant firms, and that's how much profit can be made in that industry space. And now there's nothing like that. You look at Apple, you can't say that they're in any industry. They're in movies and healthcare and computers and all kinds of services. You can't put them in an industry box. That's no relevance to today. They're in the service business and many, many services.
Yeah, it's even like Google. They've been so good at data analytics. They were like, well, pharmacy's now fair game. The
Mhm.
pharmacy's like, well, what are you doing here? You're an internet search thing, but they go, we got vast amount of experience in data analytics, so pretty much that's where we're going to go. And so all these things now, it's boundaryless. It's all about actually where do you feel you can add value, and people emerge into that. It's not like you said, it's not so strict that we've got these people that just do this and that, and that's why I think the paradigm needs to change for leaders when they're looking at an environment, is to not be constrained by the assumptions that they're in this market only.
Yeah, so I think the analysis comes, who's my customer? Who do I choose to be my customer? And then developing deep empathic knowledge of that customer, and then figuring out how to serve them, which I think is the opposite of strategy. It's starting with the customer, starting with their needs, and then responding to those needs, whether that's through analytics of healthcare variables or whether it's delivering parcels to their doorstep in an hour. It's all about the customer and what they value.
Yeah.
It's a very positive change for business, I think, if everybody can make the leap.
Yeah, there's definitely opportunities, and I think those that make this leap sooner rather than later will definitely, benefit. What advice would you give to leaders now thinking about this? How would you get them started on this journey?
Well, our approach is very much unleashing, to use that word again, removing barriers and removing constraints. So there's a lot of science behind how systems flow. So we're talking about how value flows and how knowledge flows and how people can interact together in a network to achieve great outcomes. So look at the barriers. What is stopping people from moving fast, or from creating new things, or from running an experiment, or giving better service, or like your people on the phone? Is there anything stopping them from giving the best answer or giving a decision? So it's an interesting place to start, to look at the barriers and then remove them, and then watch what happens. What are the consequences? And then keep on doing that. And then there are certain constraints or guidelines you can put in. So speed is one. So if I tell people, hey, we want you to move fast, it's okay if you make mistakes sometimes, but move fast. That's the kind of injected constraint, not a purpose, but it's a way of operating. So what are the positive influences that you can put in there? And then stand back and see what happens, which is the great challenge for managers and leaders, right? That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Even though you always tell them to, eyes on, hands off, like keep away, there seems to be this incessant need to get into detail, and you see the organization concertining to, the people are in the wrong places. Decision rights aren't right. I'm glad you mentioned about the constraints, because I wrote this week about an organization must protect its ability to act. It's all about that. What's stopping people from acting, and trying to get the loop from observation to decision, or observation to act, as small as possible. We don't want this elongated.
Right. And that's another great insight, I think, of yours, Mike, which is action is the variable here that we want to maximize. So strategy is not action. It's thinking about the possibility of maybe acting in the future.
Yeah.
The same with planning. Let them act and then see what the results are. So as you say, freedom to act becomes the big influence on that. So action then turns into results, and then I can adapt to the results, and then I can create more action in a positive loop like that. So you're right. So we think about action more than planning and strategy.
Yeah. Because the strategy is just it's a hypothesis. There's always going to be a hypothesis. If it doesn't, if you're not doing anything to understand if that's true in any way. If you're just staring at it, often does, or they spend all this time trying to make a perfect plan that when it eventually meets reality, when people go to act, it just falls apart because it's so constrained, so linear. It's never going to survive that first test.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also a hypothesis I'm trying to impose on others further down the organization. So The other variable that we've got to understand, I think, is the human desire for power. And there's power over other people, and we can probably investigate that. But there's also power over future events, which we think we can get through strategy and planning. Why do we like that? There are people who study it, and one of the hypotheses is that, I start up my company, or I start a job in my career, I get better and better, I climb this ladder, I get power, and I like that. And so I'm going to start leveraging that power. I've just lost all the reasons why I climbed the ladder, which is about creativity and intuition and collaboration and so on like that. So as I get better and better or stronger and stronger in power, I lose all the reasons why I succeeded in the first place. So it's an interesting thought. But that, one of the things we've got to drop is the idea of managers as having power over others, the hierarchy of authority. We've got to lose that idea.
Yes.
And that may be very hard. It may be an intrinsic human desire, for all I know, but we've got to think about it.
Yeah, and it's where you got to look at really what a manager's there for. And it's interesting when we look at organizations, we think about decision rights. It's like, well, these can make these decisions, they can't make these decisions, and it could be reasons why they can't make those decisions, i.e. there's a constraint, they don't have visibility, those things. But when you think about leadership, it's thinking, well, it's about deciding what needs to happen and ensuring that it does.
Well, I think managers are there for two things. One, it's a power relationship. It's this idea of the folks at the top transmitting power down through the organization, through the levels of management. And the second is it's a control function. I only want certain things to happen, and the way to control that is through authority and supervision and so on. And that is the old concept of the corporation. And so we've got to attack both of those concepts, both control and power.
And you see it play out, because often our business, they go, well, when we go to a meeting, we must have this person here because that person they're talking to is of this band or this hierarchy, and they won't speak to someone that's not either higher than them or on the same as them. I'm like, well, that's just a waste, because it's this person doesn't have the answers, that person does, who's several layers down. So why can't they just speak to that? Would it be a lot easier? But again, it's that power.
Right. And one of the meetings are an exercise in power relationships. One of the things that you hear Elon Musk say, and we study Tesla as one of the examples of this new form of organization. He hates meetings. Meetings are not useful. He wants to talk to the engineers, the people at the front line, directly, because they're doing the important work. They're running the experiments, find out what happens, find out what's in their way. And he's got the ability to remove a lot of those blockages. And as few meetings as you can possibly have, and zero would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
You can replace it with technology, with Slack and other kinds of things like that, but no meetings.
Yeah, because they spend all their time on meetings rather than doing what you say. I always talk about the Conan-Ashman theory. Your ability to regulate the system is only good as the model you're using to regulate the system. But a lot of that comes from my ability to go several layers down, or not even layers, but to the edges of my organization, to the engineers, and speak to them, because they're the ones closer to things. So the more that I understand what they're doing, what they're struggling with, what barriers they have, then I have a better sense of how my organization is actually working, rather than what's the organizational chart that we've got, because that's useless to me. I want to know how the thing's working, and if there are barriers or constraints that are preventing them from taking action, then I want to know about that, and I want to remove them.
One of the ways Musk has described his management technique is he goes to each of his companies once a week. He talks to the engineers, he tries to identify what's the one most important problem or barrier that we're facing. They work around that. He calls it sleeping at the bottleneck. Stay there until you've solved that problem. And then you move on to the next company and you come back next week. So at the end of a year, he's solved the 50 biggest problems, removed the 50 biggest barriers that company is facing. And then let's see what happens, see if it grows, see if it succeeds, and so on. That's an interesting way of looking at the
I like
management challenge.
Yeah, it's leaving the bottleneck. I like that. But again, that comes back to the point about protecting the ability to act, because it's a natural thing of, like you talk about law of thermodynamics and all this stuff, that there is a sense that we go into internal inertia around all these policies we make, and some of them seem like a good idea. We just don't understand the full consequence of what happens, because it's an emergent system. We could do something with good intentions, but we don't know how it's going to interact with something else, and who then that's going to constrain. So having that ability to identify those at the front line and seeing how that is disproportionately impacting their ability to act, and then how do we remove it?
Yeah, and
I like it.
that's a lot of the penalty of administration, of the layers of management. They create policies, right? They're trying to generalize and standardize. Here's our policy. They create processes, and that becomes restrictive. That becomes constraining. And so hacking away at those policies and that administration and those levers is one of the ways, or levels, sorry, one of the ways that you get to this more dynamic system.
Well, I'm glad you're fighting the good fight for the revolution. We're trying to do that here too. So hopefully we can start the revolution and get people to entertain a new paradigm shift where we can create organizations, management, leadership, and strategy that can meet the new reality that we find ourselves in. But it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Before I let you go, is there anything that you want to leave leaders to think about from this podcast?
Well, I think the purpose of value creation, so think about that, creating value for customers, creating value for colleagues, and how that changes your thinking, and then do that from a systems thinking perspective. How can I get the system unleashed by removing its barriers? I mean, we've talked about that a lot, but those are the two concepts, I think, value creation and systems thinking.
I like it. And as a systems thinker, I definitely applaud that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that is really true. I think that really brings the essence of that. Let's understand the value and then understand the system and the constraints. I think that's great value for our listeners to go away and think about. But Hunter, I'm so glad that I finally got this opportunity to speak to you. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that we can continue this conversation and continue the revolution. But it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for the invitation. And I will try and keep up with you because you're leading the revolution.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll put your details in for the listeners to get in touch and join you, because I think a lot of the stuff you put out is fantastic. And for the listeners, if you really enjoyed this and you found it valuable, then please like and subscribe and share to your network so that other people can get value from it. But that's what we have for today, and it's been great having you on. Speak to you soon, Hunter.
Yep. Thank you, Mike.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode. And check hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.